All right, guys, we are going to be reacting to Germany is getting ready for war. Let's jump in. Let's see what's going on.
For much of the post-Cold War era, Germany has taken a cautious, moderate approach to its military. This is evident from the fact that for the first time since the early 1990s, Germany hit its NATO commitment to spending 2% of GDP on defense spending in 2024. But now, the German military machine is rising from its slumber. They've set plans in motion that will see the nation embark on its largest military expansion in 70 years, turning its army into the mightiest in Europe in the process. Why? Because Germany is preparing for war with Russia. So, let's take a look at what Germany has planned and the ramifications for Europe's security equation. Now, after the Second World War ended, the defeated Germany was demilitarized and split into two, with East Germany becoming a Soviet Socialist Republic and West Germany becoming a democratic Western nation. After West Germany's acceptance into the recently formed NATO in 1955, the process of rebuilding Germany's military, or rather West Germany's military, began in earnest. An amendment to the Basic Law in 1955 allowed for the establishment of the armed forces, the Bundeswehr. Conscription was reintroduced in 1956 for men aged 18 to 45, with 12 armoured and infantry divisions organised into 3 corps established under NATO command. The Territorial Heer, or Territorial Army, was established for rear area defence under national command. US weapons like the M47 Patton tank started flowing into the country, and its domestic military-industrial complex began to be revived. By the time the Berlin Wall fell at the end of the Cold War, Germany had become a key NATO pillar in Central Europe, reaching nearly 500,000 military personnel at its peak. However, after the Cold War ended in the early 1990s, Germany began downsizing its military, and by the early 2020s, its personnel numbers had decreased nearly threefold to 180,000. Military spending fell from a high of 4.9% of GDP in 1963 to just 1.1% in 2005.
Irresponsible.
Between 1992 and...
I'm sorry, that's such an irresponsible move, man. You're putting your country literally in a worse position when it comes down to defending their own sovereignty. Not a good move.
In 2013, the army stock of main battle tanks plunged from 6,684 to just 323. Infantry fighting vehicles from 3,250 to 395. The number of howitzers and artillery guns from 3,214 to 130, and the Luftwaffe's fleet of combat aircraft from 553 to 205. Such was the scale of disarmament that Germany had to suffer the embarrassment of using black-painted broomsticks instead of machine guns on their troop carriers during the 2014 NATO exercise due to a lack of equipment. Then Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, changing the face of European security architecture forever, with Germany playing an increasingly prominent role. Germany is considered to be Europe's largest single supporter of Ukraine and the second largest global donor after the US, having provided over $55.5 billion in aid since 2022. That includes humanitarian, financial, and military aid, with the military component sitting at over $46 billion. Under Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Germany's focus was primarily on supporting Ukraine militarily. However, towards the end of his tenure, and particularly since Friedrich Merz took over the chancellorship earlier in 2025, the focus has increasingly shifted to building up the German military in preparation for a forthcoming NATO war against Russia. European leaders like NATO's Secretary-General Mark Rutte and German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius have repeatedly warned that Russia could be ready to use military force against NATO within 5 years. "Let's not kid ourselves, we're all on the eastern flank now," Rutte stated in a speech in June, referencing a statement made by Pistorius to the same effect. Some experts believe that Russia's economy is collapsing under the weight of war and sanctions, which would make this argument moot. If Russia can't defeat Ukraine with a relatively stable economy, how exactly is it supposed to invade NATO countries, risking war with the entire bloc under its Article 5 Mutual Defense Clause, with a collapsed economy in a couple of years, especially if it's tasted defeat in Ukraine? However, financial experts like the Center for Analysis and Strategies in Europe and the Belgian think tank Bruegel cautioned that the Russian economy is resilient enough to continue waging war in Ukraine for another 2 to 5 years. And if it achieves its goals in Ukraine, with an economy already geared for war, it may well turn its sights further westward. That's why Germany isn't taking any chances. There are 3 main directions in which a Russian attack on NATO would be most likely to occur. Through its ally Belarus into Poland, into one or more of the Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia and Estonia, and through Ukraine into Moldova. In the first 2 cases, Germany's role would be a central one. On the Baltic front, Germany has permanently stationed its 45th Armoured Brigade in Lithuania, marking the first time since World War II that the Bundeswehr has deployed a combat brigade abroad on a long-term basis. The brigade is expected to reach its full strength of approximately 5,000 soldiers and 200 civilian personnel by the end of 2027, with troops based at the Rudeninke military training area and Rukla. A bilateral intergovernmental agreement allows the Bundeswehr to use Lithuanian land rent-free, store weapons and ammunition, and establish German-language schools and kindergartens for military families stationed in the country. On the Polish front, Germany is only 357 miles from Belarus at the 2 nations' closest points. If Russia were to progress rapidly through Poland, Germany would be next in its crosshairs. Thus, it would be in Germany's best interest to provide as much support to Poland as possible, alongside beefing up its own defences considerably. Indeed, according to experts like Edward Arnold of the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI, a military think tank, Germany is anticipated to play a major role in Poland's defence. They're really expected to provide the bulk of land capabilities on continental Europe. It's from Germany and Poland that a lot of the firepower and the heft is going to come through, as well as from the US, he said. The threat of a Russian attack, along with the need for Germany to play a prominent role in repelling it, is one of the 2 main reasons driving Germany's massive rearmament now. In a famous speech, known as his Zeitenwende, which translates from the German as turning point, speech to the Bundestag in 2022, Scholz warned Russian President Putin not to underestimate our resolve to defend every square meter of NATO territory together with our allies, and committed Germany to building a...
The problem is that whether or not, I don't think they have the personnel, man. Even with a very weak Russia, I really don't think there's enough currently for NATO to stop even Russia. But I don't think they even have currently the personnel to stop Russia for taking Lithuania, Estonia, and Latvia. I don't think so, especially when it comes down to that small line. Because they don't have, first of all, they have a problem with birth rate. Secondly, the amount of personnel, I think Poland can do something about it. But then the other countries, I don't think they have the personnel, in my opinion.
Powerful, cutting-edge, progressive Bundeswehr that can be relied upon to protect us. Within 2 years of the speech, Germany had set up a special $116 billion fund for military procurement, became the 2nd biggest donor to Ukraine, and was meeting NATO's then target of spending 2% of GDP on defense for the first time, as noted earlier. The second major reason for this massive increase in military spending was President Donald Trump's warning that America will no longer bankroll Europe's defense. The US president has long made no secret of his disdain for delinquent countries that have failed to meet their NATO commitments in the past, and even suggested he might not come to their aid were Article 5 to be invoked. He then demanded that NATO members increase their defense spending to 5% to match what he considers to be the US's oversized commitments to European defense compared to theirs. Following Trump's televised altercation with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky at the White House in February, the other shoe dropped for many European leaders, including Scholz. The kind of support that NATO's European members had enjoyed under Trump's predecessor Joe Biden, and indeed all US post-World War II leaders, may not be as reliable in the future. NATO members have subsequently committed to increasing their defense spending to Trump's target of 5% of GDP by 2035, consisting of 3.5% on hard defense spending and 1.5% on ancillary, potentially dual-use infrastructure like logistics, communications, and cybersecurity. However, far from being just a move to appease Trump, this decision represents European nations starting to take much more responsibility for their own security, rather than relying as heavily as they have on the US. A committed Atlanticist, i.e. one who favors deep, immutable ties between the US and Europe, Scholz warned that Europe needed independence from the USA. He also started pushing for radical reforms of Germany's constitutional debt brake to allow much higher levels of military spending. "I never thought I'd have to say something like this," he said, "but it's clear that the Americans are largely indifferent to the fate of Europe." Germany's debt brake was written into the constitution in 2009
That's interesting.
and limited the structural budget deficit to 0.35% of gross domestic product, except in emergencies. The rule applied broadly to fiscal policy, not specifically targeting military spending. However, it significantly constrained overall government borrowing, including for defense. Nonetheless, the German parliament, the Bundestag, agreed with Scholz's thinking, and the debt brake change was passed in March, 2 months before Merz assumed office as Chancellor. The change essentially scrapped all limits on borrowing for defense, and since he took office, Merz has certainly taken this bull by the horns. Under the radical reforms he's pushed through, Berlin has thrown off all fiscal constraints on defense expenditure so that it can build what Merz calls the strongest conventional army in Europe. The reforms have paved the way for massive equipment purchases of tanks, artillery, fighter planes, and warships costing hundreds of billions of dollars as the Bundeswehr prepares to face up to the Russian threat. For example, take the Leopard 2, the Bundeswehr's main battle tank, used by over 20 countries around the world and the most iconic German defense export. Despite shipping thousands of Leopards overseas to willing buyers, the Germans bought no new Leopards for themselves after the Cold War until 2023, and even then, the purchases were only to replace the 18 that had been sent to Ukraine. Now, Berlin has placed an order for 105 Leopard 2s in a deal that will take the total fleet to more than 400, almost double the UK stock of 213 main battle tanks. And that was just in 2024. With the spending limits lifted, there will likely be further orders to follow. But the new Leopards are only a small fraction of the mountain of equipment the Germans intend to buy to face down the Russian war machine. Also in 2024, according to data compiled by the Kiel Institute, a think tank, Berlin ordered 123 Boxer armored transport vehicles, 265 protected trucks, 19 Skyranger mobile air defense turrets, 6 frigates, and 2 submarines, among many other items, in a $67 billion spending spree. An order of up to 1,000 US-made Patriot missiles was also announced. Overall, Germany's purchases during the year added up to more than 3 times the combined amount spent by Britain, France, and Poland in the same period. And if Merz has his way, Berlin...
So I'm glad that Germany is recognizing a threat. I'm not saying, listen, currently in the current state, Russia cannot take all Europe. That's that. But remember, if any of these NATO countries declare the war to Russia, that means that China is going to enter the chat. And then that's going to be the new enemy that you have to deal with. See? And there's all the country like Brazil and other ones, but mainly in that region, it's going to be China and North Korea. So that's a problem. Because currently, Europe cannot take... They can't take China without the United States. It's going to be a pain. So you have 2 countries with a high number of population. They're willing to just throw them all in one area. Go against Europe. That's not good. So at least Germany stepping into the play, say, you know what, we're not doing this. We're going to just make sure that we can start stepping up our game.
And is on course to spend hundreds of billions of euros more. It suggested it will further acquire 600 more Skyranger platforms, along with 20 more Typhoon fighter jets, 15 F-35-2 Lightning stealth fighter jets, and 687 more Puma infantry fighting vehicles. That's not to mention mountains of drones, ammo, missiles, small arms, landmines, and major modernization efforts across the board. Spending plans leaked to the Politico also suggest that Berlin will acquire 14 ground-to-air missile launchers from Germany's Diehl Defense, along with around 700 missiles. The Bundeswehr also plans to acquire various flying combat and reconnaissance drones, and has placed a $9.83 billion joint order with partner countries to replenish 155mm shell stocks that have been depleted from donations to Ukraine. That said, A major component of the rearmament plan is that the bulk of the procurement will be provided by domestic companies, delivering a much-needed shot in the arm to German industry and sending shares in Rheinmetall, the company's biggest defense company, skyrocketing. They were changing hands for around $111 each on the eve of the Ukraine war, but have shot up to over $1,966
Wow.
each today, a 17-fold increase. US-made weaponry, for the most part, is being sidelined, and where it's being bought, it's being partly or completely manufactured in Germany. For example, the order of 1,000 Patriot missiles will be fulfilled by a joint venture set up between the US manufacturer Raytheon and European missile maker MBDA. Rheinmetall has also been awarded a contract by Lockheed Martin to build fuselages for F-35s at a facility in North Rhine-Westphalia. So, how much is all of this going to cost? Overall, Germany already spent more than $57.8 billion on arms in 2024 and intends to spend another $436 billion on top of that. That's largely over and above the $116 billion already committed by Scholz. Next, where's the money going to come from? Frankly, it's going to ultimately come primarily from taxpayers' pockets in the form of massive government borrowing. That's why the lifting of the debt brake is such a crucial component of the plan. Now, on the face of it, the German economy doesn't really look like it's in the kind of state to take on such massive new and sustained spending. Throughout the 1990s and early 2000s, the country's leadership had faced the compound challenges of reintegrating East Germany, managing weak export figures, and curbing unemployment in the double digits, earning the title of the sick man of Europe among commentators. However, under the leadership of Gerhard Schröder and then Angela Merkel, the German economy rebounded to become the envy of the world with strong growth, leading exports, and a balanced budget. That was in no small part due to the policy of Wandel durch Handel, or change through trade. By taking advantage of the new eastward expansion of the European Union, a growing trade relationship with China, and especially large flows of cheap Russian gas, the country produced enough goods for half of its economy to run on exports. Along with providing the foundation for Germany to become an industrial and exporting powerhouse, the idea was that deep economic ties with Russia would also ensure Putin had too much to lose from any potential standoff. Since Russia's invasion, however, the German economy has taken a decided turn for the worse. A major factor has been the unprecedented sanctions placed on Russia, and particularly imports of Russian energy. Another major factor was the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipelines in September 2022, which supplied most of the aforementioned Russian gas. As a result of these blows, by the end of 2022, German gas prices had risen on average by up to 184%, up from 7.06 euro cents per kilowatt hour in 2021 to 20.04 euro cents per kilowatt hour. While they've come down somewhat since then, the current price for households of around 12 euro cents per kilowatt hour remains around 70% higher than the 2021 price.
Man.
The wholesale gas price has doubled over the past 12 months.
I'm always wonder how the hell we're gonna get out of this mess, man. How are we gonna get out of this mess? It is a huge problem, guys. It is a huge problem.
And experts do not foresee a long-term decline in prices. As a result, Germany has not recovered from the prolonged inflation caused by energy shortages, which has impacted not just the average Joe's wallet, but vast subsectors of the economy, from the world's largest industrial steel mills to the smallest local bakeries. Over and above a complacent reliance on Russian gas throughout its period of fast growth, Germany's energy woes have been exacerbated by resistance to nuclear energy, a transition to green energy that hasn't really worked, and an incredibly slow bureaucracy. Add structural weaknesses such as an over-reliance on exports, particularly to China, an aging population, labor shortages, and weak productivity growth, and it's not the prettiest of pictures. The country experienced a recession in 2023 with a 0.3% GDP contraction, followed by a further 0.2% decline in 2024, marking its first back-to-back annual contraction since the early 2000s. Projections suggest a third consecutive year of contraction in 2025, with GDP falling by 0.3% in the second quarter alone. It's being called the greatest crisis in post-war history by some economists. German industries have been left paying up to 3 times more for electricity than their US or Chinese counterparts. Accordingly, German companies are increasingly relocating production or research abroad, with 1/3 already having offshore R&D operations. Corporate insolvencies reached a 20-year high in April 2025, with 1,626 cases, with an estimated 1.3 million jobs lost in the private sector in total since 2022, with 141,000 employees affected by corporate insolvencies in the first half of 2025 alone.
Wow.
But there are some positive signs. Germany's extremely good credit rating, the fact that it remains the
Well, that's good, because that way they can always borrow that money, right? Even if they don't have the income, they can borrow. But then that means that they might get in debt.
third largest economy in the world, and its relatively low
They might
debt
get
to
into debt.
GDP ratio mean that there's plenty of scope still for Germany to borrow the funds it needs for rearmament at scale. At 62% of GDP, Germany's debt is way below the roughly 100% of GDP that France and the UK are grappling with, giving it much more scope to borrow. According to data on benchmark 10-year bonds, investors currently demand an interest rate of just 2.6% from Germany, as opposed to 3.4% from France and 4.4%
Wow,
from Britain,
that's
which
high.
indicates the high regard in which bondholders still hold German public debt. Some analysts, like Sander Tordor, chief economist at the Center for European Reform think tank, believe this leeway means that Germans can afford to rearm while actually cutting taxes for businesses and working pensioners at the same time.
Correct.
Indeed, while it will add large sums to the nation's debt pile, Germany's massive rearmament should boost its economy at the same time, providing new impetus to the manufacturing sector and potentially creating tens of thousands of new jobs. For example, over the past decade, German car makers
Yeah, creating jobs, but then again, how are you going to sustain that new economy? By borrowing more money? That's a problem too.
have seen their
Let's not kid
exports fall
ourselves.
by
That's a
nearly
problem.
quarter amid stagnant European demand and intensifying competition from domestic brands in China.
And that's why,
the likes of Volkswagen
and that's why the American economy is in a huge shamble, because we always borrowing money. We always running on debt. We always, last year I remember they were talking about how we can declare bankrupt the United States. And some of these media pundit, they were talking about like it was nothing, like it was not a big deal. And I was like, raw, like this is not okay. Like this is crazy.
Mercedes-Benz have scaled back their workforces and contemplated closing factories. Now, some of the country's car plants are being eyed for defense production. More jobs, albeit of a less permanent nature, will also be created by the other main arc of Germany's rearmament plan: the reintroduction of conscription. Germany has pledged to grow its personnel by 40% to around 260,000 soldiers,
Wow.
on top of a target for 200,000 reservists. Merz is said to be doubtful that a voluntary scheme alone will deliver enough recruits,
Correct.
with the issue
Correct.
having prompted a major internal dispute with its ruling coalition and displays of public resistance. Indeed, besides raising the money and securing all the weaponry in good time, Merz's biggest challenge in implementing his plan is likely to be this kind of resistance. As it tends to do everywhere during times of economic troubles, Germany's political landscape has become polarized greatly during the past few years. Roughly a third of the German population now polls for political parties that stand against Germany delivering military aid to Ukraine and are opposed to the rearmament plan. These range from the controversial right-wing AfD, now Germany's second most popular party, to the far-left Der Linke and Sarah Wagenknecht Alliance, or BSW. The leading pro-Ukraine, pro-rearmament parties, the ruling CDU, CSU Alliance, Social Democratic Party, SPD, Greens, and Free Democratic Party, FDP, still command 2/3 of the popular vote. And according to recent polls, some 54% of Germans support Merz's rearmament plan. So, on the face of it, Merz has enough support to push through his plan. But if you dig a little deeper, it's not that simple. Nearly 60% of participants said they definitely or probably wouldn't defend Germany with arms, even if it were attacked militarily. 2/3 of 18 to 29-year-olds, precisely the group most likely to be conscripted, said they'd be against conscription. Regular protests against Germany's military support for Ukraine, membership in NATO, and the rearmament plan have been ongoing since early 2020.
Yeah, the thing is that you have to deal with the fact that there's a lot of guilt of what happened in, World War II, which clearly is understandable. You cannot all of a sudden expect a society to just go, you know what? I think it's, after all these years of strong, propaganda. I'm saying it propaganda meaning like the government implementation of not favorably allowing Germany to basically arm themselves. You cannot expect the youngest or the younger generation to just all of a sudden say, you know what, I'll be okay with it. It's not realistic.
3. While these voices are a minority for now, they could easily grow, especially if Tordor is wrong and rearmament is accompanied by austerity measures and tax increases instead of easing financial conditions. So it clearly isn't going to be all smooth sailing implementing this plan, and what eventually transpires remains to be seen. But one thing you can count on is that however the cookie crumbles, the military show will be there to cover it. So,
well, we have to see. We have to see whether or not that's true or truthful. Let me know what you guys think. I will see you in the next one.